Hi everyone, we have a special edition, extended edition of the show. We're going to be debating climate change and reality versus myth, the whole 9 yards. We'll be asking questions, and hopefully we can keep Jeff under control. Not like
That's not possible.
Guys, introduce yourselves, starting with Jeff.
My name's Jeff Scott. I'm the Libertarian Party candidate, and I'm really happy to be here with an informed moderator because Alan and I work best when we are working with someone who's an independent thinker and who has sharp questions and puts us on the spot.
Can't wait for her to show up.
Yeah.
Alan, tell us about you.
So I'm Alan Smith. I'm the Green Party nominee for the 9th District special election this year. And I'm just excited to have this conversation because Jeff and I don't often get to have these very detailed conversations like this. So this is really exciting.
So let's get right into it. And the first question is, and I'll start with Alan. Would you, if it was your decision tomorrow and you ran the EPA and had a say in it, would you approve the Green New Deal the way it is, or not?
Well, so it's interesting. I think this brings up a good distinction between the Democrats who have been kind of pushing the Green New Deal through Congress right now, and the Green Party who originally came up with the Green New Deal. I think it's maybe a moral question about how quickly we need to act. So I've said in the past, you can see that I do support the Green New Deal. I would fight to strengthen it. I think that it would be good to take it away from kind of green capitalism and move it more toward a publicly owned oriented energy structure and things like that. With that in mind, I would still vote for it because I do think that we need to take action now, and I think if we can vote for it and then strengthen it over time, I think that will move us in the right direction.
Okay. Jeff?
I would vote against it. And one thing about it, well, you asked a question about the EPA.
Yeah, like say if you were in charge of the EPA and you had complete control over this. Like
right.
If you could drive policy for the environment,
right,
and you had the power to invoke the Green New Deal or just say it's dead in the water, which direction would you go? So
my answer still stands, but when we talk about the Green New Deal, we are talking about a sort of a full array of other policies. And there's a grab bag, including aspects about the way corporations are managed themselves and the way that subsidies are passed out to fossil fuel companies and a whole host of other demands that aren't actually related to ultimately to doing something about climate change. So I think part of this conversation is to parse that out, right? To say that there are different aspects of it that we can agree on, and other aspects that we will disagree strongly on. But as a package in its entirety, I would not support it.
Okay. The next level of discussion, because climate change is also environmental change, and you have micro local disasters that can affect the overall climate versus a macro cataclysmic. Our atmosphere is getting more and more toxic to ourselves. In fact, our CO levels at the highest it's ever been in recorded history, even going and digging down in ice. So let's start with the micro disasters first. And I'll use two regional examples, Flint, Michigan, and the Fukushima nuclear disaster. So nuclear is always listed as an alternative or environmentally safe deal, and we can see the nuclear reactor sludge going throughout the Pacific Ocean. You can actually visually see it from a satellite now. How would you address the Fukushima disaster? With the sludge invading the Pacific Ocean, and it's now becoming an international issue. And how would you address the Flint, Michigan, which is a regional thing that was preventable, and now is going to need some kind of abatement? How would you address both of those? They're both abatement issues, but they are affecting the overall environment too, and all that. So one's lead poisoning, one's nuclear poisoning.
Well, I honestly don't know a lot about the Flint stories because I read about it and I thought, well, look, I live in a nice city that manages to deal with its water supply. What's the problem there? My honest answer is I can't give a good answer because I haven't studied it in depth. So with Fukushima, there were a lot of stories early on about the what was coming out into the ocean and what was showing up on the California coast, a coast which I'm very familiar with. And so, I grew up in Southern California, and I also experienced the toxic sewage sludge that came up from Mexico. So I'm somewhat sensitive to that, at having planned some vacations around being able to swim in the Pacific, only to be told by my mother, don't go swimming because there's been a leak and you don't want to go out there. The water quality is too bad. But I can also remember, as a youngster walking on the beaches closer to Orange County, where I was getting a lot of tar on my feet, and so you had to deal with that. So I'm familiar with this problem of ocean pollution just from personal experience, and I simply don't know what the results have been of this disaster and the way that if you look at a map, you look at Japan and the current and the way it's supposed to come down through the west coast and down, and I know that they're monitoring it. We haven't seen any. I'm being a little silly here, but the three-eyed fish, the sort of the traditional fear of the Japanese that these sort of in the wake of Hiroshima, that there would be these terrible mutations that would last for generations. So, which is deeply embedded in their movies, right? That sort of metaphysical,
we have the metaphysical dread,
anyway. Right?
It's okay.
Yeah. So the problem is we just haven't seen it, right? And so this gets into a discussion about the EPA and how it measures its toxicity, right? And we get into a very scientific debate about particles per million or particles per billion and what sort of effects they're going to have later down the line. So far, we haven't seen on the West Coast a lot of signs of damage.
Right.
So, nevertheless, in Flint, to the best of my knowledge, we do have local authorities, presumably local water authority. I'm totally speculating about Flint, so you're going to have to tell me more about it.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you.
And how would you address two disasters that have already happened, like Flint or Fukushima, where they're both water issues, they're both long-term health issues, and how would you address that, or what do you think should be done?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. So again, I'm sort of in the same boat as Jeff. I'm not, intimately aware of all the details in both of these situations,
Sure.
But I have seen, there's a great section in this movie, Fahrenheit 11/9, right, where Michael Moore, regardless of how you feel about Michael Moore, he goes over in detail sort of the timeline of what happened in Flint in terms of certain people were not allowed in when they should have come in. They should have fixed these pipes, or they redirected the water, but only for the auto plant or something like that. That's one problem here. So I think on one side of this, we need to address what I might generally call corruption in these bureaucratic institutions. And this is something Jeff and I have talked about a lot. As you have government growing, there's a risk that systems become corrupt, whether it's corporations, whether it's government. That's one thing that the Green Party wants to do, is decentralize that power so that it's less likely to become corrupt. To address the issue, I think two things you can always do is you can just have better prioritization. You can do that through raising awareness about these things, but you also need to have the funding that's there to fix these situations. In terms of which agencies to mobilize, I'm honestly not familiar enough with
Which I can explain, and probably should have explained. I know with Flint, Michigan, for example, the local officials knew there was a problem, addressed it with the state issues. Then you had a conflict because the state authorities were more in the Republican Party and the local were more Democrats. There was a $400,000 fix that could have fixed it. the Republican state level agency refused to fund that. So the preventative measure that could have kept hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions from getting poisoned, did not get put into place. With Fukushima, the difference is of course the natural disaster that caused the reactor to leak and leak into the ocean. So really what it's at hand is, one of the things besides corruption is our country has a policy of being more reactive rather than preventative. So in climate debate, in general, it is a theory. Do we become preventative now and say the sky's falling, and we put in a fix, or do we watch and wait and be reactive? So in that, and how are you more of a reactive person? Are you wanting to watch and wait, or are you wanting to be more preventative?
Well,
proactive.
I'm in the watch and wait side, and one of the reasons is that I think that, as we just talked about a little while ago, a lot of these issues that we're talking about are frequently sold as crises, and so we have to be very careful about what we think is a crisis versus a government agency or an industry or some interest group hyping some issue that is maybe less of a crisis than they say it is. And just a couple of examples in my professional career was the year 2000 problem, right? So there was this great mitigation effort, and I could tell right from the beginning, not exactly right from the beginning, but the vibe to me was, this is a real sort of consultant sold thing, and people are trying to sell security software and all these other services. And I was in pretty good company. The CFO of the bank I was working with at the time was a pretty hard-nosed cynic about this stuff, and said, and basically the rule from the top was, look, we just need to cover our butts legally, so go out and do all these things, stuff the files, so that when there's an investigation later, because people think there's a car accident that's going to happen, so the lawyers are lined up, so just do that to protect yourself in case anything does happen. So it was really just a compliance effort.
Sure.
We're just complying with what we think is going to happen when we think that the legal system is going to pounce on us for any little glitch. And then, of course, countries that just went, year 2000, we'll fix it, they did fine. So they didn't actually expend this money to do that, and they probably saved money. Now, we're a capitalist country. People can say whatever they want.
Right.
They've got businesses have freedom of speech to go out and proclaim that there's a crisis if you don't buy my product, if you don't eat this Campbell's chicken soup, you just were gonna go hungry today,
So Alan, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go
We're
ahead.
going a little long on that.
No.
Are you
Sorry.
reactive or proactive on environmental issues?
So I'm going to do exactly what a politician would do and say we need to do both. Right?
Okay.
I think we're at a place with climate change right now where we do have to be a little bit reactive because things have gotten out of control. Through the lens of things that the Green Party uses, we see industrialization and capitalism as two things that have contributed to climate change in a major way. So in a certain sense, we have to be reactive because we're already going over the cliff right now.
Okay.
But in solving those problems, we don't just need patch fixes. So that's one of the reasons that we're against these green capitalist measures that just look really good. They're kind of dressed up. And we want to do systemic change to prevent future things from happening the way that they have now. And that's why we advocate for what's called eco-socialism, which is this idea that our government and our economy and our ecosystem are all connected, and all the decisions we make are interdependent on each other. And that's a very common criticism of the Green Party, I will say, that we can often be branded as catastrophists. I love that word, right? Because we are saying the world is ending, we need to do something, and that's not the best way to motivate people. That's a common criticism.
And in general, and I don't flat out ask your personal opinion, but do you think we're in an environmental crisis, Jeff?
No, I don't think we're in a crisis for some of the reasons that I stated earlier. I do think there are some situations in the world that we might want to look at a little closer, you know, and to take the last sort of hair on fire topic, you know, the Amazon fires, you know.
Sure.
So the thing about the Amazon fires, however corrupt you think the Brazilian government is, and whatever signals they sent to the you know, future ranchers, those fires are not historically unusual. They're about, you know, there were bigger fires in 2005, and they're kind of along with the 15-year average. So it's not clear to me, even with those raging fires. And again, I'm from California, so I know what raging fires are like in that environment.
Out west, it's pretty common.
Yeah, it's but there's also that buildup of the state can turn into a tinderbox unless you let fires burn, right? And so which does a lot more damage later. So there is such a thing as natural fires that occurred naturally in the world and let off a lot of smoke and make you cough, and those are important to the ecosystem, right?
Yes.
So that's my short answer.
Okay.
Yep. And I believe that we are facing a global climate crisis. You know, anecdotally, I see it. You know, and I know that's not the best scientific evidence, but there is scientific evidence showing that, you know, sea levels are rising, temperatures are rising, and that, again, looking at things through that lens that I see as an eco-socialist, I see that affecting everything. So it's not just simply that the planet's getting hotter, but that's affecting everything. It's affecting biodiversity. It's creating fires. It's making fires worse. It's making windstorms worse. Hurricanes. We have a hurricane headed to us right now. These weather phenomena are getting worse and worse. So I do see it as a crisis that we need to address.
Well, and I'll be the devil's advocate on both sides. One, I could say, well, if we wait too long, and if we're worried about wild amounts of refugees hitting our border, let's say theoretically, let's say the environmentalists are right. Let's say this side of the table is right. That we're going headlong into a worldwide mode where we're going to start losing sustainability. If we have climate changes are going to hit less developed countries harder than they will our country, because we have the ability to control our environment more due to our wealth and our industrialization. So countries like in Central America and South America that have less ability to combat it, when those refugees start knocking at our door, what do we do then? If we ignore the problem for the next 10 years, and it does get as bad as people are projecting it to be on the environmental side, when we get those environmental refugees, what, as a libertarian, what then?
Well, I mean, that's a hypothetical about, you know...
It's very hypothetical.
An asteroid hitting the Earth, what do we do?
Yeah.
And so...
But at least 2/3 of those refugees left Central...
Can we do just the first part of the question,
Yes,
where you say, you know, what if this is all true?
What if this is all true?
Okay, so, and I have... and Alan and I have talked a little bit about this before, because my basic position is that I'm agnostic, right? That I don't know if it's true or not. I'm not a scientist, and it's very difficult to sort out. And I read both sides. I listen to both sides. I want to know what's going on. I try to stay informed, but the science is very difficult for the average person to understand. So, having said that, I'm basically retreating to the position that if half of the country thinks this is going on, and many of those people are, you know, scientists, actuaries, people at universities, and they're thinking about the risks that we're taking. And the classic example is, well, Florida. Okay, there's coastline in Florida, right? Or there's coastline in the Carolinas, right? What if the water level starts rising? Well, can people in those states, you know, do we need the federal government to embark on a mass mobilization campaign, like essentially moving U.S. citizens, not refugees, internal refugees, internal U.S. citizens with property rights and other rights, forcing them to do the Trail of Tears, you know, out of their home against their will. So it just seems to me that a better solution would be and I hate to do this to you, Alan, but a capitalist solution would be to make sure that insurance markets, the people who are behind the scenes who are saying, how do we know what's going on? Let's get the best scientists. Let's sell protection to people so that if you are at risk of floods and it does happen, just like your house burns down, we can move you out. We can provide this kind of service to get you out. We can airlift you to an emergency spot, you can sell those services to people who are concerned about it. Now,
but that's not addressing the problem, though. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that we're going to sell insurance to the people that can afford it.
Yeah.
Because most people, not everybody's going to be able to afford that extra bill every month while we wait for the sky to fall. And when it does fall, your solution is that the insurance companies are going to be the safety net to move these people inward, just like basically like Moses, let my people go and not drown.
Yeah.
So your solution is not to save the polar caps and keep the oceans from rising, is literally we'll sell insurance and hope we can move them inland.
Well,
when our coastal cities do flood.
It's adapt to the real effects on human beings in real time to the extent that they can foresee these immediate disasters. I mean, so the other thing that Alan and I get into is this discussion about there are remote risks, and I see that you believe that polar ice caps are going to go and they're going to drown Florida or 20 years out or 30 years out. I am focused on real risks now. So just as an aside, the conversation I had last night with Dr. Klein on the Doctor's Corner is talking about how pain patients are being taken off their medications. So that's leading to suicides, right? That's leading to people dying. That's leading to doctors not being able to practice medicine. Yeah. So those are real risks.
I didn't give him a chance to react to that. Yeah.
But the point is that I have a different risk framework where I have the way that I think about these issues. So let me
definitely.
And I want to say I think Jeff makes a really valid point here, because I see this risk too in a mass mobilization, right?
Yeah.
Let's operate as though under the assumption that climate change is not real, which I believe it is, but let's say that we do this mass mobilization. You talk about inertia in organizations. Mm-hmm. Think of how much work it's going to take for us to do a mass mobilization of our economy, of our government, of all these institutions to combat climate change. And if it's not real, which again, I believe it is real, but if it's not, what is that going to do if you have this massive, it's like a giant stone rolling down a hill, right? Mm-hmm. And am I understanding your point here, that if we have all of this collective effort put into something,
that's right.
And what you're saying is that, under what you're saying is you would have a more, not necessarily piecemeal, but it would be a more agile solution to.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding what you're saying.
Right. So you're going to take the position that you're agnostic about your own belief and say, what Jeff says makes sense about taking a more piecemeal, or should we still do systematic? Should we still have systematic changes?
Which again, and I believe we do need systematic change. But if I were looking at things from another angle, I could totally understand that position, and I think that's a valid position to have.
Okay.
So do you think we have time? So what I'm saying is, do you think we have time to wait? Do you think right now, can we wait another 10 years before we do fundamental changes to the way we are now? Like, we have a certain economic or environmental policy. I said economic policy, but it is economic too. So I mean, there is choices. So we have a certain amount of dollars we can spend on this, or we collapse our economy. Either way.
Right.
So we're going to spend money now, or we're going to spend money later. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying if we do an ounce of prevention now, we may be able to avoid a pound of recovery later? Is that basically what you're saying? Do you believe that we have?
He's trying to say that I'm being penny wise and pound foolish, because if I'm trying to save pennies now in order to save these extravagant costs in the future.
Yeah, and that might be sort of, as the expression goes, right, where the rubber hits the road, because I do believe that. I think that we need action now to prevent something huge down the road. So, and I to be fair, it would not necessarily be an ounce of prevention. It would probably be 16 ounces of prevention to prevent the world from collapsing. But so it's not a small investment. It's something huge, and that's why we need the mass mobilization. And coming at it from the Green Party's perspective, because everything is connected, you're right. It's economic, it's political, it's everything.
Well, in one of the biggest things I see in climate debate is sustainability. So we talk about that a lot in the food chain. For example, if we can't sustain the bee population, for example, our food supply is over in 5 years. There's not even a debate on that. Like all agricultural economists, everybody, scientists all agree. If we lose the bees, for example, we have lost 70% of all animal species worldwide in the last 40 years. They're gone. They're extinct. So we do have some significant food chain things that have happened already that we can't bring back. So for sustainability purposes and economic purposes, we do have to address those. So how would you address those as far as the sustainability? How does the Green Party and how do you guys talk about food sustainability, food chain, environmental changes to our agricultural industry? I mean, is there solutions to that?
I don't know that there's. I mean, and again, I'm not an agriculture expert here. Generally speaking, the Green Party is pushing for much more localization of markets. So decentralization of power, and to that extent, to that end, you would have local agricultural co-ops, community-funded, community-controlled food systems and things like that. That doesn't solve the problems because there are, nationwide, food issues, right? Because of the way that our current trade policies work. We're importing produce from various states and various countries, but that's something that we'd have to figure out. And I think that's something that, as the Green Party has things, that could be something that we need to dig into more to understand how.
So it maybe I asked it wrong. So let's take this area, District 9, Charlotte, the greater.
Well, I'm happy to follow up on your question.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna give you first crack at the two-parter.
Okay.
The first part that he answered, and then I'm gonna bring it regional to this area.
Sure.
So about food sustainability, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. That he just answered, and then also too food sustainability for Charlotte and Mecklenburg and District 9.
Well, the tragedy of extinction has really hit home for both Alan and I because the fiscal conservatives are nowhere to be found, and the anti-war Democrats are nowhere to be found. So these are the two biggest extinctions that we should be sad about. So I'm a bit of a foodie, so I've got a fairly extensive garden. I got some rabbits and quail, and I like to cook for myself quite a bit. I used to be a restaurant fanatic. I used to be very spoiled living in San Francisco and going to a lot of very, very nice, fine restaurants. But I've become very suspicious of the food that I get in restaurants, especially in sports bars and things like that. So I tend not to eat that food, and I believe in eating healthy, and I believe in growing healthy. I do believe that farmland, especially, should be managed in the most sustainable way possible. That we are. I don't want to put too much of a religious component around it, but I do believe in this is our planet. We need to sustain it. It sustains us. We need to take care of it. So I'm very much in line with those values. It just depends on how we want to accomplish that, right? So I know that's kind of a very general statement, but sustainability, my party and the libertarian movement is nothing if not a theory of social harmony and about how people in the world can get along together, can operate together, can work in a voluntary way, without violence, by trading with one another, by owning their property and disposing of their property, and we believe that is a solid system. Now you can say that there are some evil capitalists who've done some evil things from time to time, or you can adopt Alan's criticism that we have a terrible system where capitalism has sort of consumed the power structure, and so it's so corrupt that the whole system needs to be
so one thing that I'll say is like on a regional level, if we're importing all of our vegetables from South America and Central America, and we've seen in the last decade, where imported vegetables have had environmental problems and poisoning problems and all that, including one of the reasons a lot of those refugees came to our southern border was environmental issues that drove them out of there because of war and other things. So Alan's suggestion was to do a regional grows, do regional, decentralize it, that sort of thing. Would you be opposed to like a local government sponsoring urban green belts and grows and things of that nature? Would you support something like that?
Well, just as
to be environmentally self-contained.
So yeah, as a person living on a big piece of property in a local community with lots of friends who are also foodies, I like that idea. We like the idea of community gardens. I go to farmers markets. I've always been a fan of that sort of thing. And of course, it's kind of a yuppie preppy thing. It started off, and you have to have the budget for some of these high-end farmers markets. But I do believe in those sorts of things. Do I think the local government should support it? I'm kind of indifferent to that, because that's for local decision makers to make. If they did it, I think it'd be probably great, and I'd participate in it.
Okay. How would you feel about that?
I would support that, and I think I've been thinking more about this idea that, because not everything can all be grown in the same area just because of climates and things like that. One thing I think that helps us with what the Green Party wants to do is there's that infrastructure component, right? So if you do need to import produce from other places, you can have that through maybe a nationwide rail network that connects these local communities that's much more regionally connected than we have through something like Amtrak right now. So that would provide a pathway or a corridor for us to move produce from these regional farms. And to your question about how this affects District 9 specifically, I think what we would like to do is we talk about restructuring or redefining what corporations do, what their purpose is, and we would do that through public chartering of corporations and things like that. And how that would affect rural communities in District 9 is you look at these big agribusiness companies. So if you think of maybe, is it Tyson or Pilgrim's Pride that's right there on 74? You've got there's that huge Smithfield plant that's out by Tar Heel, and then even I think the Campbell Soup Factory is on, it's kind of right there coming down out of Fayetteville. We could take on these corporations and either break them apart or have them redefine their purpose so that they are operating in a socially responsible, environmentally responsible way that respects their local environment, that does things in a sustainable way.
Well, and here's one of the bottom lines is we'll take regional sustainability and regional crises for clean drinking water, clean air. It usually affects the poorest people, the working class, the working poor, the people that live in the middle and down. They get squeezed. So like your insurance idea, for example, you're adding an extra monthly bill to somebody that maybe owns a home, but they own on the lower socioeconomic class, and going, oh crap, I either got to sell my home or I got to buy this insurance, because when the waters come up, let's say theoretically come up, and the same way with we have a lot of urban deserts where they can't get access to healthy food. And I think a lot of it is when this food gets restricted because of these food crises, the working poor is the one that gets squeezed. We're seeing that in school lunch programs and all kinds of other things and budget cuts where food sustainability and humanity, access to water in Flint, Michigan, that sort of thing, it hurt the poor the most. They're the ones that most got adversely affected. So what about the working class? What about the people that need access to water and clean food?
So let me weigh into this for a moment. The first point I want to make is about the insurance market, right? Just a quick point, because we have this problem in California. Earthquakes happen, and people decide they need some protection, and they go out. And the problem is, with an earthquake, it's kind of a systematic event. So you can't sell earthquake insurance to someone in, Utah or the Plains because they don't need to buy it. So they're not going to offset the losses that you would have if everybody in San Francisco or in the peninsula lost their home. So it turns out that it's really expensive, right? It's really expensive. So what a lot of people decide to do is, maybe I should fortify my home, and I should put that money into something positive, right? And fortify it. And the same way with coastal properties. I mean, you drive along the beaches in the Carolinas and you see some houses are low and some houses are high, right? So they're avoiding those floodwaters. So just let's talk a little bit about the poor, right? And about the way that people prepare their own food. First of all, I'm not, and this is, I guess, a separate discussion about, whether it's food stamps or food lunch programs and stuff. I really do believe in a separation of government and food. I think the government has done a terrible, terrible job with its food pyramids and all of this stuff. So the American diet has been very terrible for many years, and part of it is showing up in the health statistics and the things that are killing people right now. So if you look at the top 10 ways that people are dying, it's related to sedentary lifestyle, sugar, and kind of the. I'm so sorry, but there you go. So one of the other interesting things about the way that the poor function, and this I think was a study a few years ago. I think the author was Barbara Ehrenreich, but she, kind of lived with poor people for a while. East Coast Yankee, going out to California to figure out why are people poor and why can't they do these things for themselves when they've got access to this bounty. We're in California. There's a lot. Food's actually cheaper in California, right?
Yeah, it is.
So, which is surprising, and alcohol too. Thank curse you, ABC. But she lived with them, and one of the insights that she had was, look, they don't have a pantry. Right? So the key between having sort of grub, whatever you get off the street, fruit or nuts or whatever, versus being able to prepare healthy food is a stocked pantry with spices and the kitchen utensils. So a lot of people can't function in a kitchen because they don't have the wherewithal to get those resources. Now you can have some other scheme about how we get people trained, whether it's schools or whether they have access to these equipments or these basic spices so they can do things with wheat or rice.
We've gone a little long on that. I'm gonna try to get you to shift it to Alan real quick. Okay. I mean.
But that's my basic point.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Did you get a chance to address how poor people could access food and the sustainability and regional? I think you did. But I do want to move on a little bit, and I don't mean to cut y'all both off, but
sure.
What about just letting the scientists decide? What about getting a national and worldwide panel and taking this out of democracy and saying, we need like a G50 scientist panel, and they make these policies? What would be wrong with that?
Everything would be wrong with that.
Why?
Because we live in a mostly democratic world. We want to keep it democratic. Voters need to make decisions. Scientists should not be making decisions. I happen to be in a field. It's called, some people might have heard of it. I think it's called economics. Most people know it by the name economics. And this has been misruled by the Keynesians of the 20th century to propagate ridiculous notions about the way an economy grows and about what the nature of wealth is. So there are some scientific groups and some scientific interests that are not objective, that don't comport with true scientific discussion and discovery. And this is happening in the medical profession. Science can be very politicized. For you children out there, look up Lysenkoism during the Soviet Union.
But we're at a point where and we're such a large country, and when we could vote on these issues to ad nauseum. And whereas if you had a panel of scientists that could direct that, just like Medicare is not democratic.
Yeah.
Medicare for all, if it's decided and we vote Medicare for all in, we're not going to be able to choose. We're going to have a one-payer system. We're going to have, it's going to be boom. We're going to have universal health care. There's going to be a lot of things shoved out of that system. It's going to be straight. You're going to go, your Medicare is going to be controlled by a one entity. What if environmental went that same way? We had one environmental panel that drove all of our environmental decisions. Alan.
So, I mean, in theory, it sounds really good, and I like that idea. It's a philosophical thing, especially with Green Party people, when you start talking about things internationally, because we do believe in having international partnerships through the scientific community and stuff like that, but we also respect a country's ability to be self-deterministic as well. So it gets into this really murky gray area when you start talking about global initiatives that force other countries to behave in certain ways. I think the environment, especially when it comes down to climate change, is one of those things where I think that there's a moral imperative there. And I hate using that because it's a cliche phrase, but if we can make a case to other countries that this is what's going to be best for everybody, I think that that's the best way to go about it. So I wouldn't be completely opposed to it, but I want to acknowledge that a system like that, the larger that it grows, it becomes ripe for corruption in the same way that corporations and even government can be.
But could you say on the other side of the argument, fresh water and fresh air is a human right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That does not have boundaries. That does not have international boundaries.
Do you want Joseph Stalin to enforce it?
What if that's what's needed?
Then we disagree very strongly on the idea that a dictator can rule the roost and make beneficial decisions for the sake of his or her population.
You could argue that that's going on right now in the United States, that we have a primarily group think that says corporations can run the way they want to, how they want to, and that there is no checks and balances.
Okay, so you want to concentrate that further in the hands of, you want to concentrate that further in the hands of a monarch or a dictator to make those decisions? I don't look. I described what libertarians believe about social harmony and voluntarism and non-coercion. So you're importing massive amounts of coercion into the system and taking away the decision-making power from millions and millions of people. Let's just hope that if that sort of solution is imposed, that people would use their Second Amendment rights and rise up to fight this sort of thing.
But on the other side of the coin, let's use Chernobyl and the nuclear disaster in Russia, and 30, 40 years ago, whenever it happened. Then there's rumors that Russia's actually done worse recently, and then they're detecting it up in by satellite. If we don't have a global oversight, what's to keep Russia or China with all their nuclear reactors and ability to produce that much nuclear grade material? If they start having meltdowns, what keeps them from just unilaterally just keep doing it, and who corrects them?
Through diplomacy, trust, and human relations. I mean, we can't live on a planet where we don't trust other people not to suddenly break out in absolutely violent behavior. I mean, we wouldn't have the basis for any kind of species. We have to practice relations with other people and reducing conflict and settling differences in our interests by use of reasoned debate, and simply saying that the Russians or the Chinese are these demons who are eventually going to take us over and enslave us is just ridiculous. We can ward that off by being decent human beings and raising our kids in a decent way and telling them that there are peaceful solutions to the problems, and to clean the damn rooms. Well, because you want to live in a nice place, in a nice planet, and you don't want disaster. You don't want.
But as environmental disasters spill over borders, because we have that in our issue too. Like we're poisoning other countries as well. Like
right.
like Mexico, we're poisoning Mexico because they're downstream from the Colorado River. It goes all the way into Mexico.
Right.
So, and we're not policing ourselves. They're getting toxins by the ton into their country because of us.
Yeah. And they're paying us back with their sewage.
Yeah, but the issue is that we don't have any global oversight right now. There is no agency that is saying protecting the environment. And the next deal is our air. We have the 414 per million CO, which is the highest in recording, and that one's been provable and verified by multiple scientific agents. When they drill into the Antarctic ice, they can track that for thousands of years.
Yeah,
it's the highest it's ever been in drillable history as far as down as they can go. What do we do about that? Because if we don't have air, if we don't have breathable air, it's kind of over.
Right. We can plant trees.
Okay.
That is a good solution.
Okay. Who's going to plant those?
Bill Gates' idea is that we do the carbon trapping, whatever it's called, the technology.
But who's going to pay for that?
We can all plant trees. Chris, you can plant trees in your front yard. I can plant more. I'm trying to remove trees from my yard, but there's a lot of open space in the world, and trees will actually do the job.
Not by themselves though.
But CO2 is not doing the job by itself either. So you're taking a climate change, which is a multifaceted problem. There are many variables in place, and saying we need to control this one variable in order to control a multivariate model. That's just wrong.
But the CO2 is coming from somewhere. I mean, where is the CO2 coming from? I mean, is it man-made? Or is it
it's from the burning.
sprouted up?
It's from the burning of hydrocarbons. It's from the burning of fossil fuels. Again,
but who created it?
Humans.
Yes.
That's perfectly okay. If you want, Alan and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
If you want to get away from using fossil fuels, you are welcome to do that. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's go for wind. Let's go for solar. Let's go for nuclear. Let's go for, super Elon Musk battery power. Let's go for all of those things, and let's not tip the scales. Let's not let the scientists determine what the future of energy should actually be. Let's let voluntary people accumulate their capital, risk their own capital. They've got skin in the game to find these solutions, and I just don't think boards of scientific experts can resolve this.
Well, what would you have to say about that? Because that sounds like he's advocating a pure capitalist solution to that. We hope that the capitalists do the right thing. What do you say to that?
I say capitalists are the ones who created the problem. I mean, I think that, and it's not through any maliciousness. This is just the way capitalism works. People talk about our system being broken, and that's why we have climate change. That's why we have global warming and CO2 levels and things like that are rising. But this is the way that capitalism works, is because people prioritize short-term, even seemingly long short-term, if you look at 10, 20 years, profits, those types of goals over long-term planetary sustainability. So that's a key difference between, we'll say, the Democrats and even the Green Party, and that's why we take an anti-capitalist approach to this, is because we don't see capitalism as something that can solve this problem, because it's what has created it. And by nature of how capitalism works, especially through industrialization, it's only going to either stall things or make them worse. And so to come at it from a purely eco-socialist approach, that's when we start talking about systems, because it is a multifaceted issue.
So could the Green New Deal be the solution for that? Could it be the oversight to get us in the right direction of socialistic and capitalistic balance?
Yes, but I would say that what's currently in Congress doesn't go far enough, and I don't know that socialism and capitalism can coexist in that way, especially with regard to the environment. I think that that's why we need a purely eco-socialist Green New Deal, because, and just to be clear, something that's eco-socialist is not necessarily anti-commerce. It's not like the government comes in and controls every facet of the economy. It's much more about decentralization of power, putting it in democratically controlled systems as opposed to private enterprises.
Okay, so so you're suggesting a governmental oversight body to be able to control the processes of ecology, environmentalism, and climate change, more or less.
That's right, at least at the national level.
Okay.
Again, it gets kind of tricky, dicey when you start talking about international, but yeah.
Yeah, if we just contain this debate to our borders, especially since you are both candidates in the 9th, I mean, you know, regionally speaking, I think one of the big debates between socialists and capitalists is always, well, who comes up with the solution? Who pays for it? Who makes these decisions? And so you're saying the voters should decide through socialism, and you're saying capitalists should decide because they're the ones that created the problem. They also are the ones that could come up with a solution. Because I mean.
Yeah, I do believe that a market economy with private property and the price system in operation and vigorous commerce is the best way to come up with solutions to these problems. I mean, there are entrepreneurs who are sinking big sums of their own money, and some of them are, quite frankly, they're con men. You know, there's no doubt about that. There's a lot of cons going on. So whether you want to talk about Solyndra or whatever is going to happen to Tesla or this Elizabeth Holmes thing, Theranos or whatever it was called. There are people trying to come up with solutions, and I've known people who have been, working, getting money from whether it's Exxon or Chevron or the Cokes or whatever it is, trying to come up with, good, sustainable, new technologies for, whether it's batteries or efficiencies or whatever. But petroleum products, the burning of hydrocarbons is a very successful model. I'm not saying it's always going to be a successful model. I'm just saying that it has been, and there may be a certain amount of inertia. But if we want to change it, it's really got to be through consumer choice. Now you can go out and you can say, I'm on the cutting edge. I'm buying a Prius, so I'm making sure I'm not harming the environment, or I'm making sure that I don't buy single-use plastics and stuff, or I'm a vigorous recycler. There are all kinds of things that consumers can do to move the needle, and I don't think it can come from the top down. I don't think we want a Stalin to order us around to do this. Now, even Alan will say, yeah, we need. Maybe he's saying we need local Stalins. We need sort of decentralized socialism, which I'm also opposed to for slightly different reasons. But I'm accepting of these local community food banks, these local community gardens and things. We live in if you live in a small area.
You're okay with limited local socialism.
Well, look. I've mentioned this a couple times. The great philosopher king Nassim Taleb, who's written some very important books over the last couple of years called Anti-Fragile and the Black Swan. He made a very interesting insight. He said, at the federal level, I'm a libertarian. At the state level, I'm a Republican. At the local level, I'm a Democrat. And in my home, I'm a socialist. Right? And so I've said that a couple of times, and my niece picked up on that and thought, that's pretty fascinating. And so she was thinking about it. We had a long conversation about it. So it's a good way to think about the way that you organize, because I'm not against democracy. I'm not even against socialism in my own home. Believe me, my teenager loves socialism.
But I'm going to flip it back to Alan. There could be an argument set against capitalism as far as the CEOs of these companies basically driving the market and controlling the deal, and they're not elected. They're in these driver's seats, and basically those are the de facto dictators of this country. And by putting it into elected officials' hands, it would be more democratic. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree it would be more democratic. That's one way to come at it. One thing I do want to say, because Jeff and I have talked about this, and I've come to find out that a lot of the things that the Green Party is for can kind of harmonize with a lot of libertarian principles in terms of, I don't want to say self-regulation, but if we could level the playing field for people, especially economically. There are a lot of things that we would not need the government, especially the federal government, to necessarily have a very heavy hand in, but we need something in place right now to address that economic disparity between people, because a lot of people don't have the same, you call it economic mobility, the same spending power, the same wealth that other people do, and in that sense you don't have a true economic democracy, basically. And so if we can address those issues, I think that a lot of these other things we can solve with less heavy-handed approaches.
Because my argument against capitalism completely driving the environmental movement is the fact that a lot, when products first come to market, especially environmental products, they're extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah.
So without a balance of socialism and capitalism and some oversight, you're going to run into the deal again. The rich are going to get richer. They're going to be okay with it. They're going to use these products because it's cool and trendy. But the baseline of our democracy, 80% of those people are not going to be able to afford those products. So if you do a capitalist approach and they hand you all these environmentally friendly products, they're going, well, crap, that's priced me out of the market. I'm not going to be able to buy any of that. That happened with the electric car. There's nobody, a regular person can't afford a Tesla.
That's right.
So when the capitalism system comes out with a new product, it's always too expensive for the consumer.
Well, that's true. That's the way capitalism has always worked. I view that as a feature, not a bug, because rich people get the good stuff first. I mean, how are you going to change that? Rich stuff get the cool stuff first. I was always a late adopter on technology. I mean, I didn't even have a cell phone. I didn't even have a cell phone until 2009 because I thought they're too clunky, they're too expensive. I don't like the plans. I don't like the service. So I always buy computers like 2 years after they're the hot thing. So I'm not an early adopter on technology, and I'm a middle class person. So I accept the fact that people wealthier than me have cooler shit than I do.
So we do have to wrap up. We do have 3 minutes left. I'm going to let Alan go first, so you have a minute to wrap up your thoughts on climate change. What you would like to say?
Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, I do believe that climate change is real, that it's a crisis that we need to address now, and that we need bold action to combat. We need new solutions that are not the same old things that we've been doing. For me, as a person from the Green Party, I don't see that as a capitalist solution. I don't think that we need to be incentivizing CEOs to come in and take advantage of this crisis. I've said in the past that it's like they're going around like pickpockets on a sinking ship, basically. We need something systemic to come in and to transform the way that our infrastructure, that our approach to climate change and environmentalism, and as well as our social order work.
Okay. Jeff, 1 minute.
Well, I am, as you know, agnostic on the issue of whether it's going to occur or not, but I do think there are actions we can take now, such as the insurance markets and making sure that people are protected in the event of some kind of refugee or weather-related crisis. I also believe that it's very important to think about. I believe it's important to think about long-term risks, but in this campaign, one of the things I've learned, and this is echoed from the call I had last night with the pain patients, with the pain patient group, is that there are people suffering right now, and there are people on the edge of suicide, and we have veterans committing suicide, we have farmers at risk of suicide, believe it or not. I heard this just the other day from a person who works at UNC. Mm-hmm. So we have actual human suffering crises going on right before us. Now, I honestly didn't think I was going to, when I first started off in this campaign, I didn't think that this was going to hit me so hard. But this is really serious stuff. And obviously I'm an economist. I think long-term about these long-term models and about the way the economy's going and about the corruption, but I'm quite shocked at how the individual suffering and a lot of the things that are going on right now are not being addressed in this election. So I really appreciate Alan's presence this whole time to make sure that we're thinking about these issues.
Well, to wrap up, I do think life is a balance. I found that out when I've been transitioning these last 4 years, and I think the world is to a greater extent needs both capitalistic and socialistic ideals. I think the Green New Deal needs to be restructured to be able to consult both, plus scientific actual findings. We do need oversight. We do need to make a priority list. And I do think it takes both industry and socialism and duly elected officials to be responsible and report in concise and democratic ways of saying what we are paying for once and for all, and not have a 9/11 situation where we're paying for programs that never were effective. So we do not need a sludge fund. We do not need any kind of bottomless pit of spending. But we do need something clear and concise and that addresses the immediate problems and long-term solutions.
You can vote early this week, and you will be voting on September 10th.
Correct.
Right? If you miss the early voting.
Yeah, the early voting runs through what, September 6th?
Yeah, just through Friday. Yeah. But they might be extending it in some of the eastern counties because of the potential storm. Dorian, the horrible explorer.
And you can go online and find your voting sites. Please vote, please be active, and help your local community.
Thank you.
Thank you.